Tap into the psychology of engagement and more. This is where we talk about life, learning, and everything in between. This is the Lifelong Podcast, a show for those of you who love to ask why. It's because we're marketers. It's because we're coaches. It's because we're change makers. Each week, we dive into the big questions and explore the psychology of engagement with strategies, tactics, and special guests along the way. Now, here's your guide, the visibility hacking queen herself, Coach Molle. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Lifelong Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Molle from visibilityhacking.com, and as per usual, super glad you're here. You really could be doing anything else in the world right now, but instead, you're choosing to spend it here and having this conversation. It'll be fun. Today, we're going to have a lot more fun than we usually do, so I am quite excited for this one. Before we dive into the conversation, though, we have to pay the bills, so let's remind you to find me on all of your favorite social platforms, including Clubhouse. I'm at Coach Molle with an E. That's where we get down and dirty and we get into nice deep conversations about everything from disrupting our education system to having CEO gratitude hours to looking at social media strategy and podcast strategies. So much. Come join me. All right, business over. Let's get back to the fun. So today it's Thursday, which means it's time for yet another conversation episode. And today, backstory. There's always a backstory, right? So we all know that I went to this crazy high school where there was some crazy people there. And one of them is this super cool science fiction author. His name's Doctorow, super obsessed with him. And he was the first person I ever met who became a paid author. Like they actually not only got paid to write something, but then other people were reading it. And then companies would actually go ask Corey to write for them. And this just blew my mind. The idea of actually being paid to be a writer. So cool. So then I decided that I was going to be a writer. So I published my first book when I was like 15 or 16 years old. I made the book myself. I ran a publishing company called Seed Press, and then later started my own company. It was great. Great way to get through high school, my friends. But then I kind of decided that being an author wasn't really going to work for me. It was going to take a little bit too much, and you needed to apparently go to university and study and all of this. And why do I say that? I say that because I was in line at a bookstore in the city of Toronto, in line, and the lineup was huge. It just kept going. And I waited all the way till I was second in line in front of the cashier, about to pay for my book. And this lady with white curly hair walks in front of me and buds me in line. And I go, "Excuse me, lady, did you not see the line?" And she turns at me and goes, "Do you even know who I am?" And I looked up at her and I knew exactly who she was. And I said, "Ma'am, you should have stuck to being a poet." That's what I told Margaret Atwood when I was 16 years old. So maybe I should have kept my mouth shut, because authors are really incredible people. They're incredibly brilliant. They're incredibly creative, but no one's going to read their books unless they know that they're out there. And so let's today talk to this guy who not only is a super creative writer himself, but he also helps facilitate those discussions, and he helps facilitate that for people because he hosts a podcast that not only celebrates authors, both independent and highly published, but also he kind of shines a light on the whole world of writing and reading. And my friends, I want to introduce to you our guest for today on the show. I want to introduce to you my favorite breakfast. Jeff Bacon, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you too. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So tell my audience who doesn't know you yet, because they will. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm just a little guy from Wisconsin who happens to write some books and has a podcast. I also do IT consulting and a few other things, but anything I can do to pay the bills. But mostly I do authoring and I do podcasting.
So tell us about the books you write. What kind of stuff do you write?
I write dark fantasy, borderline horror. So I try and write a kind of a thriller piece. I like to take conspiracy theories and just kind of blow them up and see what happens.
Ooh.
So that's my current series is. I have a few other things out there that I'm playing with, like a kind of a dark steampunk type thing that I'm doing. Yeah, it's kind of cool. We'll see what happens. I've got that out. I've got my first one out to some beta readers. I've got 2 other books coming out in the Dark Side of Good this year that I'm playing with. Unfortunately, they're supposed to be out in 2020. Didn't happen. So they're going to be coming out here in a short while. I need to make some changes to them and everything. So yeah, but 2020 happened, and gosh, nothing else happened as far as publishing goes. So there we go. But I am in an anthology that really kicks butt. It's called From the Shadows. It's with the Facebook group Indie Fantasy Addicts, and it is like 714 pages long. I'll just grab a copy of it here. Just so you understand, you can buy this book and also use it for a doorstop or carry it in your car for self-defense, whatever you want to do. But
that's what I always say about books. Yeah. If you don't like them, you can read them and get some info out of them. If not, great for self-defense.
The nice thing about this book is it's got all these different authors in here. Some are USA Today bestsellers. Some of them are Amazon bestsellers. I mean, it's all over the boards as far as the talent goes. I love those types of anthologies for the fact that you get to work with a whole bunch of different authors. Now, the question is, where's a podcast come into all this?
Yeah.
Here's the thing. When you're an indie author, you struggle to get your book out. So you publish it on Amazon, or you go wide with Kobo and iBooks, blah, 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 whatever. And the problem is that unless you're willing to spend a ton of money on advertising, no one's really going to know that book's out there. There's like 4.5 million books on Amazon. Guess what? You're just a little reed in a sea of books, So what I thought was 2 things. Number one, I'd been on podcasts before and I didn't really like the format. Ask me a question, I answer it. And, you have 15 minutes, go, and it was very short and choppy, I guess would be the best way to say it. And so what I try and do is I try and take these authors who are awesome. They're incredible, each one in their own way. And not only talk about their books and anything else they want to plug, because everybody's got all these different projects that they work on, whether it be coaching, whether it be this, that, whatever. But also, so you kind of get a feel for what their personality is. Are they fun? Are they, very serious? What do they love? What do they hate? That type of stuff. And it's always a great conversation. I've never had a bad conversation with an author. And understanding their personalities, I think, especially in fiction, gives you a much better read on how they came up with their ideas and how they built their worlds and why they built them, and their experiences, whether it be that they have, experience in war, or whether it be that they have this overly active imagination and they loved unicorns when they're young, or I've always loved fairies, and this is why I write, about the fae, or Celts, or, whatever it is. And you really kind of get into the mind of the author, or at least I try to. Just like, and I kind of make it like we're just sitting down at a bar having a beer, or something like that. And it becomes very, the conversation goes from talking about a book to really getting in depth with the author. And all of a sudden an hour shoots by. It's like, hey, we gotta go, boy, a lot of these authors I could spend 2-3 hours just talking to, and that's probably too long for my podcast. But anyway, so that's what I do.
And what drew you to being an author first?
A couple of things. I loved reading when I was young. I loved reading basically Stephen King, and I'd read, some books from some other authors, but basically it was all Stephen King. And that was the rage of 8th grade, and all the way through high school. I was just like, oh, did you see that new book that came out? And anything else horror that came out, it was fine. And that was a long time ago. When I got into college, I stopped reading because I was reading all sorts of other stuff, like psychology books, accounting books, just depending on what my major was that particular month. But I got into computer science. And so I spent from 1994 until about 2008, only reading Microsoft and only reading about, SQL Server and reading about, data structures and, hardware and And a friend of mine pointed out, he says, well, we're just kind of talking. And he goes, hey, what do you read? I said, well, this is the current book I'm looking at. And here I'm reading about Python. Woohoo. It's a new programming language coming out. He goes, man, you need to read for enjoyment. And it just kind of, yeah, you're probably right. And it's just one of those conversations where I'm sitting there like, whatever. So he came back to work the next day and he brought me 3 books. He said, you should sit down and just read these. They're real quick reads. They're funny. They're really well written. And you know what? Have some fun with it. Maybe you should read for enjoyment. It's like, I used to. I guess I can do that. And I read those 3 books in 3 days and gave them back to him and said, you got any more? Yep, sure do. He'd hand me 3 more. And, and so I ripped through this series and I started buying books, just books that I wanted to read, and whether they be fiction or nonfiction or historical fiction or whatever. And then I got a really crazy idea that I could write a book. I've been talking about it for years. And I always thought, well, I'm going to write a computer book, a nonfiction type book or whatever. And, kind of did it, kind of didn't do it. It wasn't real great. And, I was sitting there, I was just driving. And all of a sudden it just kind of hit me. I was making up stories in my mind. It's like, I should go into fiction. It's much more interesting than this boring stuff that I'm trying to write. And I'd written some articles for some people and did some ghostwriting and did some other things, and it all turned out fine because I'm taking their ideas. But then I started thinking, okay, what can I write about? So then one thing that I love doing in my spare time, you're sitting there and you're watching a server load up or something like that. Oh, let's go see what the current conspiracy theory is. So I took a bunch of conspiracy theories I loved following and turned it into a book. And then it's like, okay, bucket list, done. Got 1 book. Maybe I should write a second. Maybe I should write a third. And then that was basically 2019 when I published those 3.
Oh, that's really cool. I think it's fascinating that you take like your conspiracy theories, for example, and you just roll with it and you ask yourself, what if, and just immerse yourself in that environment. Have you ever found yourself figuring out that, like, walking down that what if path and realizing that you would rather be in that fictional world? Or are conspiracy theories usually going to lead you down some dystopian Handmaid's Tale kind of route?
Well, yeah, kind of. That, I mean, the worlds that I create out of the conspiracy theories, I don't think anybody wants to live in them. And the problem is that the book 4 that I have was written in 2019 to start off with, and I was going to finish it up in 2020. And I kind of ran out of time because of work and everything else. Well, COVID helped with the work thing, but it dealt with a virus and a vaccine and all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, let's not do that right now, So then I wrote, I was like, we'll just wait till this all blows over in 8 weeks, like everybody says it's going to. Yeah, that worked out well. And then, so I'll work on book 5 and I'll work on book 6, and we'll just do bing, bing, bing again. And so then I got book 5 kind of, outlined and rough drafted, and I got book 6 outlined, and it wasn't too bad. I started kind of writing that, just adding the layers to it and everything else that I possibly could. And, the problem was I looked back at book 4 and it's like, oh, that's not that good. Okay, let's change this. Let's do this. Oh, and the problem with going back and rewriting things is that, especially if you've rewritten, or you've already written, what's going to be book 5. Yeah. I killed some people that lived in book 5. So I had to go back and rewrite book 5 to make sure that they were dead. And, that caused all sorts of problems. And yeah, so it, and even though resurrection is a thing that I deal with, these guys couldn't come back because it just made the story so much better if they're just obliterated, gone. See ya, no heaven, no hell. You're just gone. So, yeah. So I'm in the process of throwing that out to some beta readers, and see what they think. And then once they think that, then I'll send it to my editor and see how bad he beats me up.
Oh, that's cool. I am a huge fan. Like, I have to say, if I mostly read nonfiction, but when I read fiction, it's all dystopian. Like, it's 1984 would be my favorite book. Second favorite book would probably be Animal Farm, maybe Brave New World. And I just, having grown up with that as my canon of literature, when I reach adulthood, or as I reach adulthood, I look around and look at what's happening in 2020, for example, and go, oh, this is predictable.
Yeah.
Oh, I read about this. Like, I see where this is going. And it's unfortunately because of these darker kind of the evil of the world books that I would read. But it's kind of, I think, set me up to be a more resilient human overall. So what do you think books do to inspire us to be either better people or worse people? Or what can dystopian literature teach us about the future?
Well, when you take people's imagination and you fly off the handle with it, and you create these worlds, these magic systems and everything else. And what you become is you become kind of a fictional sounding board for what the possibilities possibly could be. And so I'm sure that you saw during the COVID, how many books were dealing with viruses and dealing with, world plagues and this and that. And oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. And, there's lots of people are hanging on to their signs going, yeah, it's the end of the world. We're all going to die. Oh, wait till version 6 comes out of COVID. It's going to kill us, type stuff. Yeah. And, but when you're writing something that's dystopian, or you're writing something that is truly wicked as far as building a world, you're dealing with fears, and you're dealing with not only the fears of your readers and whatever they interpret that you read, but also things that you come up with. It's like, what's the worst possible situation we could be in? Okay, let's write that. Okay, now let's step it up a little bit. Now let's take my hero and just spank him, just make him hurt, and oh, well, he lived through that. Let's try this, and you smack him again. And, sometimes a story, sometimes real, the realism of the world mimics a story, and sometimes the story mimics the world. And the problem is with, 2020 and 2021, as it's starting to wrap up, is I'm not sure how much further you can really go, with reality.
Yeah.
I mean, this has all been pretty surreal. So if you're going to step that up a notch, okay, where do you go from here? And it's got to be, Armageddon, and survival type stuff. And, how does the world survive after something that wipes out half the population or 3/4 of the population or whatever? Yeah. And I think that dwells on, I think that really resonates with a lot of people that have this doom and gloom type feeling, where they say, okay, this could really happen. Even to the extent of if there's 2 things that happen that are in their favorite book that's dystopian or kind of futuristic, or even zombie, horror type stuff or whatever, and they automatically, it resonates with them like, oh my God, it's prophecy. No,
yeah,
it wasn't.
Oh, this reminds me of, well, it's not a book. One of my favorite movies is Shaun of the Dead. So they all, like, greatest zombie movie ever. Zombie genre meets comedy. For those of you who, for some reason, haven't watched it, go watch it. Zombie apocalypse happens, and they just, head on over to the pub. And it's just a different view, a different set of lenses in order to see that problem where, oh no, the world's coming to an end. It's a zombie apocalypse. But let's just take on that character for a minute. Let's just step into this alternate reality and experience it in a different way. So instead of being framed, say you have a crisis event, and we as humans, like real world flesh and blood humans, are walking into that crisis, we tend to get anxious, nervous, upset, all that kind of negative emotion. And we just get overwhelmed by that at first because that's a threat to our safety we're walking into.
Right.
And if when we immerse ourselves in the world of beautifully written fiction, we can enter those same emotional states, but with the safety of knowing it's just a book. We can close the pages when we need to, but we're able to then fully immerse ourselves in an experience, in a crisis moment, in an apocalypse, in a zombie apocalypse in a pub, and know that there is no threat to our safety, and we can really try and play that mind game of how would this character handle this situation. They are braver than me, they are stronger than me, yet they still have noticeable flaws that make them relatable to me. And I think that really empowers people. But we also have like horror movies where we can just sit back, enjoy, and watch the show.
Right. You know, there's two aspects of that. Number one, I'm going to hit on horror movies. You know, there was a Geico commercial, I think, or something like that, where they, you know, let's run towards the chainsaw, you know, let's go over here, you know. It's all the really poor choices that people make in horror movies, where it's just like, oh no, don't go to the graveyard.
Oh, I hear that creepy noise in the forest. Let's go into the cabin.
Yeah, you know, that's a great idea. Wonderful. Glad you did that. Yeah. You know, really furthers the plot along. You know, the old slasher movies like Friday the 13th. As soon as you saw the shirt come off, you knew that there's a machete coming right through it, because that's just the way, you know, it's like, okay, I don't know how but we all watched them, you know, just for whatever reason. I think the very first horror movie that I really got into, there's two of them, American Werewolf in London, and anything to do with Freddy Krueger, because I thought that was very imaginative. You know,
Freddy Krueger scared the crap out of me as a kid, and it was because, well, I wasn't afraid of him looking at him on TV. I was afraid of falling asleep.
Exactly.
And like, ooh, and then you take that to the next level. I'm from the generation of Saw. I think Saw revolutionized the horror genre. Total side tangent here, but Saw gave us two different things. It gave us just enough gore that the gore kids were all over it, but then it also psychologically screwed with you, because it wasn't necessarily about being afraid of what you were seeing on the screen. It wasn't about being afraid of falling in a pit of needles. It wasn't that. It was knowing that this guy, this Saw guy, will get into your head. So whatever you're thinking up, going, that's not going to scare me, that's not going to scare me, but deep in your head, you know what will. That's what's going to show up. Beautifully done.
It was very, very, I mean, that first movie was so psychologically, I don't want to say scarring, but it was, you know, it made you think.
Yeah.
Made you think an awful lot about, you know, the choices that you make, and, you know, the different things that could possibly happen. And is there really somebody out there that's going to make me pay the price for my arrogance, my, you know, whatever my personality flaw is, that, you know, happened to tick the wrong person off at the wrong time, you know, type thing. You know, it's a beautiful thing when a book can take you down a dark alley, and, you know, you really start getting into it. And as you're walking down that dark alley, you actually start hearing, you know, you're reading about the sounds, but then you start hearing the sounds, and you're actually so involved with the book that you just, you know, you're starting to live the moment that you're reading. And when you do that, the effect of what you're about to propose to them in the book is that much, you know, you step it up that much more. And it's a talent that a lot of authors, you know, work very hard to get to. And, you know, not saying I'm there at all. But that's what everybody tries to get, is that, you know, you're living this book. You're not just reading it for entertainment. You're all of a sudden so involved with it that, you know, it's a part of you. Yeah. And I think that, you're going back to your question, you know, how does fiction really help humanity? I think science fiction and fantasy, science fiction tells you what could be. Fantasy, in its own way, in the author's way, I think handles a lot of social dilemmas.
Yeah.
Realistically. I mean, if you look at it, there's always, you know, two people at war, two people that are going against each other. There's always that drama, that dramatic climax. You know, you got the hero's journey, or however you happen to be writing it. and all the personality defects that they have to get over to actually win. And you have the villain who seems to be, 4 or 5 steps ahead of the hero all the time, and he's got his own plan of what's going on. And that you can dive that right down to, life in the office. Yeah. Everybody's got their their nemesis, their arch enemy, oh, Susan, she's such a, she's such a snot,
Just can't get the idea out of my head of a dystopian science fiction version of The Office now.
Oh, you know what? There was something like that. There's a movie out where everybody's working for a corporation and they lock it down and then they have to start killing each other.
Ooh.
Gosh, I can't remember what it was. It was kind of a dumb movie, but it was kind of cool because it was psychological. What would happen if somebody controlled an office building and they implanted explosives into everybody's head? That was the premise of this movie. And when they locked it down, okay, you have 4 hours to pick 10 people to kill. If not, we're going to blow up somebody's head. And by the way, you see Charlie right there? We're not lying. They push a button and his head explodes. It's like, oh my God, okay, this is real. And so you have all these people pitting against each other, trying to figure out who they're going to kill.
So it's like the adult version of Battle Royale. You took the kids who survived the island and you grew up and you put them in an office.
Yeah, in an office setting. And it is really bizarre on how they set it up. And it's, you kind of know who's going to win in the end. And everybody's betraying everybody. And, so the good guy does, end up winning. And I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but then what's really interesting is that they take the movie and they set it up for a sequel, because after he wins and he actually kills the bad guy that's in control and hitting all the buttons and exploding heads, he ends up dying. And they kind of end it as, somebody else watching saying, we should move him to level 3. It's just like, oh, good,
Oh, it's like that. I don't know what the name of the movie is, but there was a movie that came out, I think it was in 2020, where it's this like fictional prison tower and this floor floats down to the I think it might even be called Floor. And like this platform moves between the different levels. Oh, it's fascinating. Okay, so on the top of the tower where the platform starts, it starts with a ton of food on it, like this beautiful feast. And it stays at your level for a certain amount of time, and then it goes down.
Yeah.
Those of you listening at home, if you know it, put it down in the comments. Let us know. Like, oh my goodness. Like when writers, not only like book writers, but movie writers and story writers in general are able to create those so beautifully constrained worlds for us. Like I love when they give us just that one building. We don't see any more than that one building that's happening. And for the most part, this movie takes place on one level of this building. Yeah. But we're introduced to the world. And then on the other side of that, you have like the world of fan fiction. So I got into fan fiction because I am a die-hard X-Files fan. Like head to toe X-Files everything. So I was first introduced to X-Files fan fiction in like 1998 when someone wrote this love story between Mulder and Scully, and someone printed it out on, that old printer paper that you'd have to rip apart and rip the seams off, beautiful. And we'd read this story about Mulder and Scully. And I was like, I don't remember this episode. I remember X-Files being one of the most creatively written shows of its time, where they had these special episodes and they'd bring us into these different worlds and different characters and different times. And it was beautiful. But then it was this world outside of the show itself, where like you have the X-Files canon, but then you have everything else that people have created, the possibilities, like everything. And I think that had a lot to do with the return of the show decades later. So what do you think about fan fiction and the possibilities that it brings?
Well, I mean, I think the best example of fan fiction is Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that movie came out, people are immediately addicted. And, over the course of, 5 years or 6 years or whatever it was, the next two came out, and it was kind of like, okay, that can't be the end of Luke Skywalker. I mean, Yahoo, he won, and everybody wanted to see the backstory, because they started in the middle and moved their way back to, the end of the book. And so you had all these people writing fan fiction basically on, these are the stories of Han Solo. This is Luke Skywalker. Here's some new Jedis we're going to introduce.
And then you end up with like the Klingon dictionaries and stuff.
Like, well, yeah, for Star Trek. Yeah, absolutely. That type of stuff not only keeps the original creation alive, but it adds to the lore,
Yeah.
I mean, it really does. George Lucas said he was trying to start a religion when he wrote Star Wars,
Well, he did a good job.
And, he was kind of being snarky about it, but he really had to figure out what, the dogmatic principles of the Jedi was so that he could write everything around it. So he, there's this mysterious force that holds everything together and and so on and so forth. Gene Roddenberry, when he was, producing Star Trek, really wanted to take a futuristic view at current social problems, and he nailed it. And even though it lasted 2 seasons or 3 seasons or whatever it was, his vision of what Star Trek was started I don't think he even would have imagined that, there'd be Trekkie conventions and there'd be all this fan fiction and all these movies and all these, Next Generation and, the whole
and
thing.
within the world that he's created, people are having discussions about like social issues that we're like, not just the social issues we're experiencing by watching the film itself, but like who gets to be a captain. And it's like that discussion we're having right now in 2021 about who's allowed to be a Star Trek captain is going to be very different now than what it was when the original series was coming out. It's so cool that not only does fan fiction allow us to add to the canon and add to the lore and add to the complexity of the world, but then to also modernize it and bring it with us, allowing that to stretch throughout time. I have to say, I am definitely not as much of a Star Wars fan as I am a Trekkie.
You're a Trekkie? Okay.
Forever.
All right. Prosper. There we go. No, I
it works.
It works. Yeah, well, I'm old and have arthritis. No, I don't. But anyway.
And it's neat to like look at Star Wars versus Star Trek in terms of character development, because in the Star Wars world, you have completely made up races, like completely biologically different. They're super creative. They're the what ifs of what could exist in space. Really
I
cool.
think the difference is that Star Wars is really a childhood fantasy. It really is, because it doesn't really adhere to what do you think science fiction is? Because usually science fiction adheres to, our understanding of physics, or it takes our understanding of physics and actually turns it, and says, okay, well, this is why this works, whereas Star Trek's very successful at saying, okay, this is what warp speed is. This is why this works. And
they create their own physics.
You've always got Scotty or some Scotty like, well, of course we can do this because, the electrons, and they scientifically actually, make you believe that this can happen and it's a possibility. Whereas Star Wars, I think the biggest complaint amongst most of us is, in the movies, it's like, okay, you're in space and you're dropping bombs. There's no gravity. They just float. It's just like that, really makes you, it's like, okay, you just have to understand that this is a childhood fantasy and they're really making it for children. If you read the books are much better than movies as always. But I mean, there's all these different stupid things that happen in Star Wars. It's like, okay, there's no way in any real world this is ever going to happen. Okay, you've got gravity, you've got these other little things of laws of the physical nature, and I don't care what kind of force you have, it's not going to help you survive space by floating yourself into a new cabin. Oh, look, I'm going to jet across the space and I'm not going to blow up or anything. So space is totally different in the Star Wars world.
Yeah.
And I get that. I mean, I get, where the directors are trying to go with it, kind of. And, in Star Wars, I think you have to ignore a lot of stuff to enjoy it. Yeah. Just enjoy it for its fantasy aspect. Whereas Star Trek, you get into it, it's like you can really buy into the technology. There is, I mean, the Borg, which is why, okay, that is totally possible. And they kind of go through how they make the Borg, and how the Borg actually exists, and so on and so forth, and how they reversed it in Jean-Luc Picard, but it's all very, if something gets cured on Star Trek, it's not by sheer will. It's because, I developed this pill that,
it's like the Bible for science fiction, but it's
right.
science. It's science first, whereas
but it's so
Star Wars
good.
is fiction first.
It was so forward thinking when they created it that now we have cell phones and everybody's going, well, that's just like Star Trek, and so they relate things that we have today with our technology back to back in the 60s. Gene Roddenberry predicted this, and so I mean, I think Star Trek is much better for science fiction.
Yeah.
Star Wars is more fantasy because you really have to, they ask you to buy into a lot to be able to actually, digest it, because some of the stuff they do is just like, oh no. Oh, you should have done that
through the whole thing.
Yeah.
How does that make sense? But wait.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm going to skip over that. And we're just going to watch the next part. Okay. Which is fine. The bigger point I want to make with this is that everybody has an imagination, and there's never been a better time for anybody who feels so inspired to sit down with a pen and pad or sit down with your computer and, just write out a story. It is very simple to write out a story. It doesn't have to be long. You can do short stories. You can do novelettes. You can do novellas. You can do novels. You can do, 714 page, whatever's you want, whatever you want. And, for not much money, you can spend, and some author is going to come on and say, oh my God, he's cheaping it out. Okay, I am. But on the other hand, whatever, and that's fine. But you can go on to applications like Fiverr, Upwork, or, whatever it is. And you can get some pretty decent covers made for, under $100. You can go find some pretty good editors. They're going to cost you $500. And then you can, sign up, go through all the tutorials and everything on Amazon and be an indie published author. You can throw your work out there and then figure out what you want to do with it. You don't have to advertise. You don't have to do all these other things to try and make money on it. You can just throw that idea out, and maybe you get picked up, maybe you don't, by a regular publisher. You can do all sorts of stuff you want. But the important part is that never has there been a time where people could take their creativity and turn it into a work and put it out there. And you never know what's going to happen. Lightning can strike. For most people, it doesn't. For most people, they have to write 10, 15, 20 books, and then they start to get recognized or whatever, or be in so many anthologies and have people like, which is all fine. It's all work. I mean, you don't have to make this your full-time job, but if you have creative ideas, you don't know what kind of effect you can have on society. You don't know what kind of effect your imagination can have on everything else. So why not share it? You know what? And the other thing is, I'm going to tell you right now, there's going to be these people that are out there going to give you 1-star reviews. You know what? They can go suck gas. That's the nice way of putting it. Because you know what? They aren't doing anything but reading books and being critical. There's those people that are sitting out there in society going, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do this. Oh my God. I can't believe that I spent time reading this book. You know what? Shut up. Until you publish a book and you get that same treatment, shut up. It's fine if you want to be constructive, but if you just want to be nitpicking and say, hey, this is the worst book in the world, I don't care what you think. I really don't. And if you're going to be a creative and you're going to go out there and you're going to put yourself out there, and it's scary and it's exciting and it's a wonderful experience, I'd say everybody needs to do. Express yourself, go out there and create something, whether it be poetry, whether it be some sort of a written work, artistry, whatever. Go out and create. But when you do that, there are going to be those people in society that are going to look at you and say, I really didn't like your book. And if they're going to be honest about it, well, I don't really read that genre. I don't really do this. I don't do that, or I didn't like the way this ended, and they may give you some constructive criticism. Then there's going to be those mean people that just sit out there and go, oh my God, I didn't like it.
I didn't like your cover.
The funniest thing in the world that I hear from other authors, and it's happened to me too, is somebody gives you a 1-star review on book 1. And then you see that same person say, well, book 2 isn't any better. And then they read book 3 and say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry I wasted my time. I will not be reading book 4.
Until it's put out.
And you just sit there and think, well, thank you for buying 3 books.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what?
Exactly.
And I really don't care if you want to trash me or not.
And if we look back, like in our own lives to high school English class, there were definitely books that we didn't connect with. And that's not our fault. That's because they're books that don't connect with us. But there are amazing books out there. Like, I wish high school English teachers would bring more fantasy and would bring more horror and would bring more of the traditional classroom books into play, just to show their students that there are incredible people putting out incredible ideas into these awesome books. And books don't have to be thousands of pages long, people. Write a novella, write like 50 pages, like just start writing.
Yeah.
But a lot of people find that the biggest obstacle is starting. So do you start with Once Upon a Time and then just continue on, or what's your process like?
Oh, no. I actually start with action.
Oh.
Something's got to happen. I mean, there's in my mind, and this isn't my original thought. This is stolen from other authors that do the same thing. But the very first line's got to be something happens.
Cool.
It's got to be. It can't be once upon a time there's a prince. It's more along the lines of, as a sword penetrated my stomach, I thought, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, what's the mistake? What did you do?
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Turning the page.
Yeah. And it's that type of a thing, or, something really weird. A friend of mine had an idea and he said I could steal it, and because he wasn't going to do it. And I'm still playing with it. But, so you start off in a war scene and it's all written in third person. But so you start with a person, and he's running up a stairwell. And an axe comes down and splits his head. Okay. As he's falling down the stairs, he's like, oh, I'm dying, whatever. Then automatically switches to the guy that actually had the axe. He's running down after the guy, and he steps out and he gets shot with an arrow. And he's like, oh, I'm dying. Now it flips to the guy who shot the arrow, and you flip about 7 people. And then you finally get to your main character that you finish the book with.
Oh, neat. So like the whole book follows this series of characters?
Well, your first 7 characters are dead, and your 8th character is your main character.
Like, because I could see that evolving over the series of an entire book or in the first chapter.
Yeah. I mean,
that's so cool.
It's a brilliant idea. It's just like, how do you pull it off? And so when you're sitting there, that's the other thing, about writing, is that you get these sophisticants that have gone to college and gone and had their English classes and know how fiction's supposed to be. And they have all these rules, like you don't do first person and mix it with third person. Oh, you don't look from this perspective, or whatever. You know what? This is the age of creativity. This is an age of indie writers. Do what you want to do. You know what? If it doesn't work, here's the great thing about it. And I can't remember who put this quote out there, but luckily with writing, you have a redo. You can rewrite it. You can re-release it. You can do all sorts of things. If you really screw up your first book, so what? You put it out there. Now you know how the process works. Go ahead and rewrite it and put it back out there. Take that one down, put a new one up. Version 2, whatever. Which is very unlike brain surgery, where you have to get it right the first time.
Very unlike brain surgery. Oh, yep.
So, I mean, and that's where I kind of fall back to my podcast, and it's like, okay, you know what? There's all these people out there that say, I'd love to write a book.
Yeah.
Go do it. Sit down and do it. Take 15 minutes. Take 15 minutes and write something down. Create a journal. have all your great ideas, and then take one and run with it. So what? You know what? Even if you write it and don't publish it, at least you wrote it. But then if you just write it, you might as well send it to an editor and see if they can't, help you out with it. And once you do that and you spend that money and you're looking at it like, oh my gosh, what should I do with this? Publish it.
Yep.
You know what? And then see what happens. You might, be the next movie of the week from Netflix. You might be, the next, you might be writing the next Harry Potter series that kids love. You might be writing something that changes lives. You really don't know until you put it out there. And you don't worry about copying other authors. Like, oh, I saw this idea over here. I saw this idea. We all do it. Oh my gosh, I need to have a dragon in there. You're not going to be original.
Yeah.
But what you will be original with is your interpretation and your story. Yeah. So everybody's got the same things. You've got magic. You've got dragons. You've got wizards. You've got, witches. You've got zombies, whatever it is, unless you come up with something else. Like my daughter really wants me to write a small short story on a polar monkaroo.
Polar monkaroo.
It's a cross between a polar bear, a monkey, and a kangaroo.
I think you should write that as well.
Yeah, no kidding. And make it the hero of a story. That'd be really cool because she thinks she's a polar monkaroo. Because she growls like a bear, she climbs like a monkey, and she bounces around like a kangaroo. So we just came up with that. And it's like, very cool. But you can make your own monsters. You can make whatever it is. But I'm telling you that there's a lot of things that you can add into a story that aren't original. You can go and you can rewrite Sherlock Holmes books if you want to, because that's all public domain. But it's your twist on it. It's what you're thinking. It's how you write it. It's how you tell a story, So if you're really good at sitting in a bar and telling a story and everybody's entertained, you might want to try writing. It's all about the story. It's not about, oh, you misspelled a word on page 32, because everybody's got spelling errors, even Stephen King.
Yep.
Don't hold yourself up above, and that's the other thing is don't hold yourself, up to a standard that nobody else can live up to. Everybody has problems with their scripts. And that's why you see version 1, 2, 3, 4, and 16 of a book. That's why it gets republished. I mean, look at Harry Potter. How many times did I think she went through, 11 different revisions of her first book before it was actually, the one that you can buy now.
Cool.
Yeah, because there's errors in it. There's, this is bad grammar. This is this, and the editors were picking up different things. But that happens. Even Stephen King's books, go through, multiple revisions. They get published and it's like, oh no, there's an error here. Well, a version 2 and we'll add something else, or whatever. I mean, that happens. Yeah. So don't get dismayed if you're writing something and somebody says, oh my God, you can't write. Anybody who has criticisms, I dare you to write the perfect book in one draft.
Yep.
I dare you. Show me.
So we've talked about movies and we've talked about books, and we'll talk more about your podcast in a moment. But I want to combine the worlds of movies and books, because we all know, those of us who love to read, we all know that there is really only one movie that is better than the book it was based on, and that's Forrest Gump. I will not argue that with anyone. But in your opinion, what is a book that is way better than the movie version that people should read if they haven't already?
Okay, my latest fix, I'm fixated on it because Netflix canceled it, but I thought the book is awesome, is absolutely awesome, and the Netflix series is awesome, but it's not as awesome as the book. But it's you could watch the movie and read the book,
and not be disappointed.
But you can also read the book and watch the movie or watch the series, and there's 2 seasons of it. And be like, oh, wow, they did a really good job. They did about as good of a job as they could have adapting a book to a Netflix series. And that would be Altered Carbon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Great choice.
That is, a fantastic book. I mean, yeah. And here's my problem with it. I actually had an idea kind of like that. And I was trying to figure out how you could how you could actually obtain immortality.
Yeah.
the same way that they do with that. And I was sitting there, I just was thinking about it. I wrote it down in my big fat book of ideas that may or may never happen. And it was like, God, that would be really cool. Let's go out and see what else is out there. And I found Altered Carbon. And, sometimes you read things and you're like, I could never do as good of a job as this guy did. No.
Oh, and I love that they used the format of a series as well, because usually what makes movie versions worse than the book is that they have to cut out so much, because the richness that authors are able to put into really just a single sentence can take an hour to explain on a movie. So the fact that they used the series format really allows them to get in and really play with those characters, play with those relationships, and play with that richness. I love it.
I do too. I almost prefer the series over a movie when you're adapting a book. I really do. There's even the like the Stephen King movies, they do not even, as much of a hand as he had in those, or even the Neil Gaiman influenced movies and TV series. You can tell a difference between the TV series or the series versus the movies, because there's some director there saying, okay, this has to be 2 hours and 3 minutes. It's 2 hours and 6 minutes. So we have to cut this final piece out. It's like,
we can't really go into that extra character because there's too much stuff that would make it an R-rated film, and we want to keep it PG. Like, yeah. I would say my favorite, or the book that I think is way better than the movie, even though the movie is already awesome, would be Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. The great movie, I would say top 10 of my movies. But the book, there is so much more in the book that just is passed by in the movie that they really get into when you're reading it. So that's my recommendation.
I watched the movie before I read the book.
Yep.
And now I can't watch the movie.
Yep. Same.
It's just like, it was a good movie when it came out. You read the book and then watch the movie and you're like, oh, yeah, exactly.
I wish that they would go back and redo the movie, because they missed so much.
They did, like you said, they did a good job with it. And if you're just going to watch a movie, yeah, it's a good flick, but the book's so much better. And I think what happens is people run out of time and they don't think they have enough time to read a book. And so they'll watch a 2-hour movie versus spending 2 hours reading a book, type thing. And it makes no sense logically. It's easier because you don't have to, you don't have to concentrate as much with the movie, I guess. I don't know.
No, that's why they have audiobooks. Like, there is literally no excuse anymore, people. No excuse. Nope. Movies are always better than the books, unless it's Forrest Gump. That's the moral of the story.
Did you say movies are always better than the book?
I mean, no. I mean,
the books are always better than the movies, except for Forrest Gump. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm picking out my keen listeners. That's what I'm doing. Waving my hands. Edit this out. No,
stop. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Start over again.
Welcome back, everyone.
That promotional spot was brought to you by Klingons. No.
By the Klingon Dictionary.
Buy yours now on Amazon.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about your podcast, because I think it's so cool that you are creating this platform, not just for the authors that are on their press tours that are scheduled by their agents and they're popular and you see them in Barnes and Noble and they're Amazon bestsellers, but you also help to spotlight indie authors. And for the most part, you're heavily spotlighting these indie authors. And I think as a passive listener and as someone who would like to one day write a proper book one day, I find it really inspiring that you share these stories and you kind of highlight the person behind the book and not just the book itself. And so what inspired you to highlight not just the popular authors and to shine a spotlight on the indie authors too?
When I first started writing books and writing short stories, nobody wanted to talk to me. I was the odd kid in school, just like, hey, I'm kind of interesting. Nope, don't want to talk to you. You've only done a short story. It's like, okay, that's cool. So I wrote a novel. And then again, it's like, you haven't written, you just got one out there. I mean, maybe that's the only one ever going to write. Why would I waste my time on you? So then, I had 3, and people started saying, oh, okay, well, we'll talk to you or whatever. And I got kind of upset at the format of most podcasts. When they have to do with an author, because it's, question and answer, they cut you off. And I never really felt like anybody could really get my demeanor or understand who I am based on those podcasts. All they knew is that I could answer 15 questions that they sent me 2 weeks prior to the show. And maybe I got to answer it, maybe I didn't, depending on whether or not we ran out of time. And there's no follow-up questions or anything like that. And so I was sitting there thinking after my last podcast that, and I have to admit, I was not sober at the time, and I was talking to some other authors, and I was just kind of thinking that out loud that I could do it better. And so, it was kind of a put up or shut up kind of moment. And so then that was in September. And in October, it's like, hey, I got a podcast. Anybody want to be on it? And everybody did. Just kind of interesting. I started booking out, and I'm, trying to figure out how to not take so many authors on, because I could do 3 or 4 interviews a day if I opened it up. Yeah, I need to meter this a little bit. And it's not because I don't want to highlight the authors, all the authors out there. It's that I have other things to do during the day, like write my own books and, make a living and, stuff like that. That's like, I love doing the podcast, but I have to kind of limit it a little bit. And so what I did was I created a kind of a tiering system. So I only take so many authors that have published 8 or more books.
Oh, cool.
And then anybody that's between the 1 and 7 books, I only take so many of those. And then I have spots open for people that have published their first book.
Cool.
And so what I want to do, and the whole purpose of the platform is that those of us who actually have kind of a following, of a couple thousand to, 10,000, readers, we do the podcast. And, the readers actually get to, you send it out in your newsletters, or you publicize it however you want to. Hey, I'm on this podcast, and you get some that actually watch it and listen to it just because they like seeing their author, one of their favorite authors. And then you get these other people who are kind of, stuck in the middle. They're not quite there yet. And you interview them, and then, they have exposure to these other readerships that may or may not like their books. And then you have the ones that just published their first book. They're all nervous and everything else. And I want to give them exposure too. So, I'll sprinkle those in to the podcast. And my hope is that it becomes a launching pad for people. So when, the bigger authors have books that they brought out, that, it can be just a kind of a thing that works with their publicist. And everybody else, it's like, okay, here's a place I can go. We can talk about my book. We can talk about all sorts of other things. And if an author, and like I said, all authors are really awesome. They all have their own special techniques, and there's things about their personality that they put in the books that resonate with their readers. Okay. Not the reader doesn't always understand that. So if they get to listen to their favorite author or this newest author that they started following, kind of, tell them a little bit about their life and the things that they're struggling with and the things that they've done and what influenced them to write their books and just other things. I truly think that endears their readership. Yeah. It's, I love them. This is why I like the way they write, because I went through that same thing, or, whatever, I think it's a good idea. It's just putting it all together and making sure that everybody has an equal footing. So like I said, I kind of match it up in tiers and say, okay, I want so many of this, so many of that. And then bring in the newbie indie authors who get no exposure except for whatever they can pay for. One of the problems with being a new indie author is you don't understand all the scams out there. So, anybody emails you and says, hey, if you give me $30, I'll tweet your book. Yay.
Don't waste
Okay.
your money.
You just wasted $30. Come on to my podcast. I don't charge you a doggone thing, and I'll throw you out to everybody that, I get, a good amount of people listening to it week from week. So it's like, it's a start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that you base it on stories too. You show people the behind the scenes, who the author is, what inspires them. So it kind of sets that frame so people can connect with authors regardless of where they have been on the charts or how many books they've published, because it's about the story. Like we forget when we're reading, and we forget when we're in the publishing industry, that it's ultimately about the story and the impact that story has on the reader. Bottom line, it's not about how many copies you've published. It's not about if it comes in hardcover. It's not about if it smells like a great new book. It's the story that matters. I love that.
Exactly.
So how can people find your podcast?
If you go to DIYwriter.com, or if you look me up on anywhere where you happen to be listening to a podcast, I am all over the place. Just look up DIY Writer. I'm on YouTube. If you look up Real Bacon Jeff, you can see all about me on Instagram, and I know. Instagram's something that's kind of cool. I want to bring the podcast over to IGTV. I'm trying to figure out how to do that within the constraints of, I'm thinking about just taking highlights and throwing them out there and then leading them back to the, whatever. But the full length podcasts are on YouTube, Podbean, iTunes, Audible, Pandora, iHeart, and God knows what else, Stitcher, Spotify, blah, 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 blah.
So, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any last words for everyone?
Go write something. Go out, write something, create something. You know what? Don't worry about being criticized. Go out there and do it. Create something, and if you love it, somebody else will too.
Oh, I love that. You have inspired me, because 2021, I know that I'm writing a book. I'm writing a nonfiction book right now about inspiring leaders. But I feel like I need to complement that with a piece of fiction beside it. So that's going to be on my bucket list for 2021. And once that's ready and done and published, I'm going to be on your show. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Oh, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute blast. For those of you guys listening at home, make sure that you check out Jeff's podcast, because I know that there is a writer in each and every one of you. You guys have incredible stories. And maybe if you don't feel inspired to write your own stories, connect with people in your community, your loved ones, your neighbors. I'm sure that you'll get amazing inspiration from them as well. So let's connect again. Find me on all of your favorite social platforms, my friends. On Instagram, I'm 3 Pines Leadership. On everywhere else, I'm Coach Molle with an E. And of course, come hang out in the Visibility Hackers Facebook group. We'd love to have you there. So you can find me at visibilityhacking.com, and you can find me on our next episode. Guys, thank you again for joining me. I will see you in our next episode. And until then, remember, I love you, and be excellent to each other.